Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. This is our first media briefing, public media briefing now for over a month. But the reason for that is that the pandemic and its administration has been going so well under the able tutelage of Dr. Brink and many, many other people. But we do have things to say to you today which are important. And today we're announcing our next major step in our travel rules, and that makes and will mark a further reduction in the restrictions. And for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic, our travel rules, will be in line with that of the UK. Now, as many people will know, the UK has announced that it will change its own travel rules from the 4th of October. We're going to do exactly the same and from that date. First of all, that means that we'll be treating all arrivals from within the common travel area as blue arrivals, which means the only requirement being lateral flow tests, which travellers will carry out themselves. And I'll say more about that in a minute. This will be for all common travel area arrivals, regardless of whether they've been vaccinated or not. Remember, the common travel area is the UK, Ireland, Isle of Man, Jersey, and our good selves, the whole of the bailiwick. Now, the requirement to do lateral flow tests will remain in force, but we'll keep it under review and look at it again within the next month. So the maximum will be a month before it's reviewed, but it may be reviewed within that time. Now, for arrivals outside the common travel area, the UK is ending its green and amber categories from the 4th of October. But it will keep its red list. So the bailiwick will be ending our categories 2, 3 and 4. We'll have the same red list of countries as the UK, and that will be the only list of countries. Anyone travelling directly from a red listed country will need to test on arrival and on day 9 and isolate until a negative result on the day 9 test. If they travel via the UK, they'll complete their quarantine there, and then when they travel on, they won't have to do any further isolation here. So again, another simplification. Anybody arriving from outside the common travel area from a country that's not on the red list will follow just one of two routes, and that will depend whether they're fully vaccinated or not. If they're fully vaccinated, they will need to do a PCR test when they arrive, and that's it. They will not need to self-isolate while they await the results. So that you take your PCR test if you're double vaccinated, and you can go about your business, obviously, unless you get a positive result, in which case you'll have to come back and isolate. But if you're not fully vaccinated, so that people that are completely unvaccinated or those that are only partially vaccinated, they will test on day arrival and on day 8 and isolate until the negative result comes from day 8. We're also making a change to the travel history period of time that we ask about your journey. Right now we look for 14 days, and that will be reduced to 10. You'll still need to fill out the online travel tracker to input that information just as you do now, but hopefully that will be even simpler because the rules have changed or will be changing from the 4th of October. Now, Dr. Brink will go over that again with her usual care, with her slides, which are now famous, to help illustrate the rules in full. So don't worry if you haven't followed every bit of that. We'll also be updating our travel guidance on our website from now. Now, all of those changes which I've described come into effect on the 4th of October, in line with those in the UK. There are operational details which we'll be finalising between now and then, as it was just yesterday that we made the decision at the CCA, and that followed on from the UK announcement on Friday night. The UK also did agree to make some other changes effective from this Thursday, that's the 23rd of September. In terms of travel, there is one of significance. We've agreed to accept proof of vaccination from all international jurisdictions. That will be on condition that it's one of the approved vaccines, i.e. AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna or Janssen. They will be considered a fully vaccinated traveller if the traveller can produce proof of that. Now, that's going to open up travel even further because people will be able to reunite with friends and family, and some island residents have loved ones in parts of the world where access to them has not been practically possible. I hope now for very many people that will change. Finally, moving away from our travel rules, Dr. Brink will also be announcing some changes in how her team manage cases and contacts of cases from this Thursday. Now, I'll hand over to her shortly, but I believe it's right to take stock of where we are. We have seen, especially since we opened our borders on the 1st of July, much more travel become possible. We now welcome, on average, more than 1,000 arrivals per day. Whilst doing this, we've kept the case numbers under control, ensuring that the health service has not been overwhelmed. We have not needed to impose on island restrictions, but we do continue to stress the need for all of us, and it's a continuing need to adopt good practice and reduce both the risks of us catching the virus and us spreading the virus. Sadly, and very sadly, since we last held a briefing, three of our friends in Alderney have died with COVID-19. I take the opportunity personally on behalf of all of the CCA as well and all of our supporting officers to extend our deep sympathies and condolences and best wishes to families and friends of those who've died. Finally, I want to make two announcements and say one thank you. The first announcement is in relation to these live briefings. We expect to hold fewer of these going forward. The CCA intends only to hold them when there's a major change in the CCA response or COVID response, as is the case today, or if there is a genuinely urgent and serious development. Also, from the end of this week, we will stop posting our daily COVID statistics on social media. That's not to keep anything from anybody, as those will be still updated on our COVID website every weekday. But we believe fewer people are interested in that now. People are recognising that figures of active cases have become less relevant. And I'd also like to give one thank you. My colleague, Deputy Chief Minister Heidi Salisbury, was down at Liberation yesterday when they came in helping out. And she would like me to say, and I say so fulsomely, just how wonderful the people who were taking that service, was welcoming people to the island, were ensuring that they were properly shepherded, were doing their job. And they just don't do that one day a week, they do that all the time. And those remarks would extend to the people who are doing the similar tasks at the airport. So on my behalf and everybody else's behalf, we thank you. But anyway, enough from me, and over to you, Dr. Brink.
Thank you so much, Deputy Fairbrushe. So things are moving on. We are in a good position, and what I'm showing you on the first slide is what our journey has been since the start of the pandemic. So, of course, you know we saw the first case in March of 2020, and the first spike that you see is our first wave of infection, which caused us to go into lockdown. That was caused by the original SARS-CoV-2 virus, so the one that was first identified at the start of the pandemic. We went into lockdown and we enjoyed a period of being relatively virus-free. And then in January of 2021, we had our second spike of infection. That spike of infection was caused by the Alpha variant of concern and caused us, of course, to go into a second lockdown. Now, what we have seen since then, we saw a period of very little viral activity, and we opened our borders on the 1st of July, albeit with some restrictions. And what you see then is not another spike of infection, but you see the surrounded hump of infection, but no spike of infection. And I think that's really important because all of those infections were caused by the Delta variant of concern. Now, this is a variant which is, of course, more transmissible. So we owe a huge debt of gratitude to every single islander who's helped keep us in this favourable position. We, of course, have had a tremendous response to our vaccination programme, with the overwhelming majority of our over 18s now being double vaccinated. Really important, and that's protected our health and care infrastructure and has kept our island running. We've had a summer with no internal restrictions on the island, and of course we've retained some of the border restrictions. But we are in a favourable position. Our schools have reopened, we haven't seen a spike of infection, so now it's time to move forward again. And if we look at the key components of Step 3, so this is Step 3 of the Bailiwick Blueprint, and Step 3 was always our return to greater global connectivity. So Step 3 has 4 key components for us in public health. The first is the change in the case and contact management, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The second is the broader acceptance of vaccine certification. We have people from many parts of the world wanting to visit our islands or indeed wanting to resettle here who've had vaccinations in different jurisdictions, and we want to try and accommodate their visit, resettling, visitors visiting us into the Bailiwick. Then we have the formation of what we're calling the CTA bubble, the common travel area, as Deputy Fairbrushe said, consisting of England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Isle of Man, Jersey and ourselves. So the common travel area we want to have as a CTA bubble, where we have free travel, unrestricted travel within that CTA bubble. So very much like the Bailiwick bubble we had in earlier parts of the pandemic. And then finally, we're looking at aligning our border requirements with those of the UK. So again, entering a more global situation. So we've got 2 time points for the introduction of these changes. The first is the 23rd of September, so this Thursday. And what will happen on the 23rd of September, we will continue with post-arrival lateral flow testing for the blue travellers being the currently categorised blue travellers. But we're only going to do that for a month, and then we're going to review it and decide, or possibly even review it earlier, and then decide how we move forward. We're also going to move to a new case and contact management, and I'll discuss that in some detail with you, and introduce wider vaccine certification acceptance. That will happen on the 23rd of September. Then on the 4th of October, we have 2 very significant steps forward. The one is the move to the Common Travel Area bubble, which I've described for you, and the second is that we align with the external border restrictions of the UK. So if we take the changes for the 23rd, the first thing is to look at how we're going to manage cases. We will continue to confirm cases with diagnostic testing, but we're only going to require cases to legally isolate for 10 days as opposed to 14 days. Now, alongside that, of course, is the provision of high-quality care to islanders who have COVID. Now, we know the vast majority of people, particularly those who are double vaccinated and indeed are younger, will recover completely from COVID. But there are some people who require hospital care. And Dr. Raby and his team run the hospital cell where they look specifically at providing modern management to people with COVID-19 should they require care within the hospital. And of course, primary care are intimately involved with caring for anyone who's ill but not ill enough to require hospitalization. That forms an integral part of our step forward. So the other very significant changes we're making are with regard to contact management. So we are intending to continue with contact tracing through autumn and winter of 2021. We don't know what autumn and winter are going to bring us. We know that we had very little respiratory virus activity towards the end of last year and last autumn and winter. That was because many parts of the world were in lockdown. We are facing a more uncertain autumn and winter this year. So we'll continue with our contact tracing through into autumn and winter. But we are going to change our contact tracing policies. The first being, children and young people aged 18 years and younger will not be required to self-isolate if they're a contact of a case. They will go onto a daily lateral test device program. So they'll go onto their lateral flow testing program. Now, we've selected 18 and younger for practical reasons, because if you think of the schools, a lot of the sixth formers will be 18. Now, we of course understand someone who's 18 is classified as an adult, but we didn't want to have an adult and a children and young people program within a school environment. So anyone who's 18 and younger will then have no contact tracing, no isolation. They'll be contact traced, but they'll have no self-isolation if they are a contact of a case. Vaccinated contacts are already on a modified program, but we're going to de-escalate that further. So vaccinated contacts of a case will just go on to a daily lateral flow testing. They won't have any requirements, any self-isolation requirements, and they will have a single PCR test, probably on round about day 5 to day 7. But if someone is identified as a contact of a case, they can have a lateral flow test, and if that is negative and they're fully vaccinated, they can go straight back into their work environment. There will be some areas that work with particularly sensitive situations that may adapt the processes slightly, but for the overwhelming majority of cases, if you're fully vaccinated, you're a contact of a case, you will be free to go about your business with negative lateral flow tests. Unvaccinated contacts of 19 years and older, will have to self-isolate for 10 days, and again, they'll have a PCR test. They'll also be offered lateral flow testing. Now, of course, there might be exceptions depending on individual circumstances. I've alluded to some of those. So the main change that we're looking at here is the no requirement for self-isolation for contacts of cases who are 18 years and younger, and the modification for fully vaccinated contacts of cases. It's a very significant progression with regard to that. The next step forward that we're taking, again, this will happen on the 23rd of September, is in relation to vaccination certification. We want to extend vaccination certification to all international countries, as all countries, jurisdictions, states, as long as they have an approved vaccine. So that's the AstraZeneca, the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Janssen vaccine. Now, of course, we are going to have some documentation of that, and I've outlined some of the information we need: name, date of birth, vaccine brand and manufacturer, etc., etc. So we need to have a governance framework around this, but we believe that broadening the acceptance of different vaccination certificates will help people with travel, connectivity, resettlement. So again, it's another very important step forward for us. So the next step that we're planning to take, it relates to the borders. And this will happen on the 4th of October. And as I said, there are three key points here that I wanted to highlight. The first was the creation of the CTA bubble, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. The second is the alignment of international categorization with the UK. So basically, as the UK moves forward to a red and a rest of the world. And the third is the reduction of the travel history period from 10 to 14 days. And we've attempted to outline this initially in a table-type format. And if you look to the left of that table and illustrated in blue, you'll see that vaccinated and unvaccinated people from the CTA, as long as they've been in the CTA for the last 10 days, will have no travel and no self-isolation requirements. So they'll be able to come backwards and forwards within the CTA with no self-isolation requirements at all. In the first instance, we will be testing people on arrival into the bailiwick, but that might well be reviewed sooner than a month. So we'll be looking at that and see how that progresses. For red countries, whether a person is vaccinated or unvaccinated, they will be required to self-isolate. And there are two ways in which people from red countries will enter the bailiwick. So the one is if they travel directly back into the bailiwick from a red region. And what they'll then have to do is a test on arrival, a test on day 9, and self-isolate until the result of that negative test. If they enter through the UK, they will be required to fulfill the UK isolation requirements, and that may be a quarantine hotel, is a quarantine hotel at the moment, but when they then are released from UK isolation, they are free to travel to the bailiwick with no further self-isolation requirements. So that leaves us with the rest of the world. And the rest of the world, non-CTA, is divided into vaccinated and unvaccinated people. So for those travelling from the rest of the world who are fully vaccinated, so it's a non-CTA, non-red region, they will have a test on the day of arrival, but will not be required to self-isolate until they receive that test result. For vaccinated people, for unvaccinated or partially vaccinated people, they will have a test on arrival and a test on day 8 and will be required to isolate until they have a negative day 8 test. So if you look at the summary of those changes, what you're looking at is unrestricted travel for vaccinated and unvaccinated people within the CTA, alignment with the UK red regions, and alignment with the UK requirements for non-red regions travel from outside the CTA. So significant steps forward for us. So, of course, as we move forward, this is not without risk, we know that, but we've done well so far. We might see more cases, we might see a spike of infection. We don't know what the future brings us, but we are in a really good position. We've got a highly vaccinated population. We've got islanders that have worked with us through the pandemic. So we will continue with our surveillance program. We will continue promoting the messages of how we can prevent infections focusing on the World Health Organization 3C, so crowded spaces, close contact, confined. So those are the real areas that we've got to look out for. The hand and respiratory etiquette, masks, consider using masks in closed, poorly ventilated spaces, and of course the stay at home if you're unwell. And those will form an integral part of our winter planning. And I wanted to then end up by focusing on some of the return to education information that we've got to date. And we have identified cases in a variety of schools, a number of schools now, through our contact tracing and testing policies. And this is what we expected. It's what we expected and what we planned for. But we have not seen an exponential increase in the number of cases. So we're low and steady. So we've got to keep our cases low and steady. And that's important because it keeps our whole island infrastructure running. I wanted to specifically focus on certain things. The first is the issue of a runny nose only. It is not public health guidance that a child with a runny nose alone, first of all, requires testing. They don't need testing, and they don't need to stay away from school, colleges, early years setting, or indeed any extracurricular activities. So what we're looking for is a good old cold. So if a child has a runny nose with a sore throat and a headache, those are the symptoms we're looking for. So a runny nose alone is not a reason to keep a child off school, and it's not a reason to request testing. The other thing I wanted to make absolutely clear is that household contacts of a symptomatic case are not required to self-isolate themselves, unless, of course, they become symptomatic themselves. And I think it's really important that we look at these messages and understand these messages clearly, because we want children to attend as much school as possible. And I think that's important as we move forward. And I wanted to end up by saying a thank you to all the parents and the students involved with the return to school. We're incredibly grateful for their support, but also as we move forward to this to the stage that we're at now, to the wider opening of the island, I want to acknowledge the help and support that we've had in public health, and I've had personally, from islanders across the bailiwick, the engagement in the vaccination program, the helping us get to where we are. I understand it's been difficult. I really do understand. But you've got us into a situation where we are confident that we can move forward to greater connectivity and introduce what are some very wide changes over the next couple of months. So thank you so much from me to all of you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brink. As usual, very cogent, succinct and helpful. Questions, please, media. Yes, Juliet.
Well, obviously, I imagine a lot of people who are watching with great interest the booster programme, which has obviously got underway in the UK and in Jersey this week. We haven't heard anything about anything similar to any timescale yet, but anything similar in Guernsey. What's currently going on behind the scenes, and what sort of timescales could we see?
So the booster program's due to start at the end of this week here, so over the next couple of days. So we've planned for it, we're ready to go, so that'll be that's due to start being rolled out at the end of this week. So we're good to go. We've got all our documentation together, our vaccine suppliers are in place, we're identifying our groups, and we'll start immunising or vaccinating towards the end of this week.
Vulnerable adults over 50, is that still the...
So it's along the lines of the JCVI, so starting off with health and care workers, care home residents, and going down in age-based, and then of course allowing for the 6 months between the second and the third dose. That's really important. The other program that is also underway is the third primary dose for immunosuppressed people with weakened immune systems. Now that is a very bespoke program. So what we do there is we work with the primary care provider of the individual. So for example, if someone's getting chemotherapy, you might plan to give that third dose between 2 cycles of chemotherapy to ensure that you have an optimal response. So that program is already underway, and the booster program, as I say, starts towards the end of this week.
Yes, Ewan.
Ewan Duncan, BBC Guernsey, just sort of keeping on that theme, I suppose, where will those boosters be taking place as a reminder, and when will the vaccination centre be winding down?
So the booster doses will be taking place primarily in the vaccination centre, and I think we'll wind the vaccination centre down when we no longer need it. At the moment, we're about to deliver a very large boosting program. Some of the boosters will occur in specific sites, for example, care and residential homes, but the rest will occur in the community vaccination centre.
Yes.
Matthew, the Bailiwick Express. We've had numerous messages from concerned parents who are wondering if there'll be a consideration to potentially relax public health guidance relating to children being sent home from school with good old-fashioned colds. I know you mentioned runny noses there, but as we head into the winter months, colds will become more prevalent, so with the flu and stuff like that. Is there a consideration to drop that guidance potentially?
So I think we've got to be clear about the guidance. Runny nose per se has never been a public health recommendation for a child to be kept off school, and nor has it been for asymptomatic SIBS of a child that is symptomatic. So we have to be clear on that guidance. I think we need to be also clear, is the child ill or not? And to me, a lot of parents will know. So does the child have a runny nose, a sore throat, a headache? School's probably not the best time for that. But I agree with you. We need to look very clearly and be very clear about what symptoms are okay to go with school and what aren't. And in fact, we're doing a further piece of work on that to provide further clarification. And I've been very fortunate in that I've had a lot of input from parents, and I really appreciate them emailing in, because we're using that to feed into being absolutely clear. So we get the right balance between not having the uncontrolled transmission of an infection within a school environment and keeping children at school. So we've got to keep that right balance, and I think that's of fundamental importance as we move forward.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Luke Webb from Ireland FM. We're hearing a lot in the national news about vaccines for 15 and under, especially in America where Pfizer is approaching the FDA for approval. What's the situation locally when it comes to vaccines for 15 and under?
So, in fact, about 3 hours ago, the Committee for Health and Social Care approved the proposal to offer vaccine to 12 to 15-year-olds within the bailiwick. And so we now are looking at providing the correct information to these groups of individuals. We have elected not to vaccinate within the school environment, but to run bespoke clinics or run the service through the community vaccination centre to give young people a chance to discuss. So it's not just everyone's lined up to get a vaccination. They'll be able to come in, have discussions, talk about the pros and cons. We are developing a cohort of vaccinators who have a particular interest and knowledge in this field. But we will be offering vaccination to 12 to 15-year-olds in the bailiwick.
Yes, you.
And to those 12 to 15-year-olds, will they need parental consent, or will they be able to give their own consent?
So we always like to work with parents, but we also have something called Gillick competency, where we assess the competency of a child. But in the overwhelming majority of cases, we will be working with parents. And we've always worked on the vaccination program as a collaborative program. We fully intend for that to continue. We've done that in our vaccination of pregnant women, and we fully intend to do a collaborative program with young people and with their parents. So we see this as a program that we co-deliver and co-deliver together.
Yes, Juliet, then you, Matthew.
I had a colleague who attended a meeting last night on behalf of the Guernsey Press where Nick Hudson of Panda gave a live-link presentation at the Coathills. I believe more than 150 people attended that meeting, and that obviously raised some concerns about whether vaccines were safe and whether masks were effective, and obviously some concerns about whether lockdowns are more harmful than COVID itself. I was just keen what you possibly had to say to possibly those concerns, and because obviously there's not a huge part of our population now that shares these views, but obviously quite a number.
Well, let me start first in relation to that, because Dr. Brink obviously is the expert, the virologist, but just when I came into this position in October, I had no more knowledge of the matter than anybody else. Obviously, over the last 9-10 months, or 11 months now, I've had lots and lots of knowledge. I have no doubt at all, that the science is overwhelmingly in favour of people being vaccinated. It's not without risk. Of course, there are certain people, frankly, it's sad that there's any, but there aren't that many that have suffered as a result of having a COVID vaccination. But the evidence is overwhelming that it protects people. It protects them from a serious illness, most cases. It protects them from passing the virus on in most cases, but it is not infallible. It doesn't work 100%. But if we had not had in this jurisdiction, and I would be venture enough to say in other jurisdictions, the world would be a much poorer place. I appreciate other people's views, but I believe that the science is so clear and so overwhelming that there's no doubt in my mind that what we've done in this bailiwick and elsewhere is appropriate. But over to the expert.
Yeah. I'd absolutely echo that. The vaccines have undergone safety and efficacy evaluations through the MHRA and indeed through other organisations across the world, and they've undergone their clinical trials. And I really think that if you look at the safety and efficacy of the vaccinations and look at how many lives they are estimated to have saved worldwide now, I think it is quite compelling. And I think as we move forward, you've only got to look at the situation with COVID-19 at the start of the pandemic, with our first wave of infection, where 17 islanders lost their lives. And where we are now, the loss of any life is tragic, but managing COVID with a more transmissible variant in the form of the Delta variant on the background of a almost fully vaccinated population is a huge comfort, because we know that the most vulnerable in our society are protected against severe disease and hospitalisation. And I think that's so important that we value that.
Okay, Matthew.
I'm going to ask again about the long COVID study, if it's still going on, if we've learned anything from it yet, and whether or not any findings will be published.
Yeah, so it is still ongoing, and it is something that we need to look at and analyse. The ONS have recently released data, as I'm sure you're aware, and I think it was 1 in 40 people have significant symptoms. And I think that is another reason when we focus on COVID, it's not only, and I think this is really important, that you not only focus on the acute impact of COVID, but the overall burden on the population and on individuals themselves from post-COVID syndrome.
Thank you. Next question. Yes.
Hi, Catherine Levy, ITV News. Just wanted to ask about when you envisage unvaccinated people from outside of the CTA being able to arrive without having to isolate, because obviously the changes today are quite significant, so perhaps not that far away.
So we're aligning with the UK on this. So we'd be aligning with the UK travel restrictions. So the plan as we move forward is to enter into a more global situation. So we are looking at our CTA bubble and then aligning with the UK. So we'll be looking at what they do. Of course, we'll be looking at the data ourselves, but I don't have a time frame for that.
Dr. Brink, one of the last press conferences, the 13th of August, I asked the question about ending lateral flow testing, how long it would go on for. You were hopeful at that time it could be by October, but judging from today, it might be slightly longer than that. Obviously, the question I asked at that time was about sports teams and Guernsey FC and Guernsey Raiders going away. And I'm spoken to Guernsey FC this morning, who obviously have a game this weekend. It's a home game. So obviously there will be a cost involved for teams coming over here. And I'm sure they're glad to hear that, it could be only just a few weeks away before lateral flow tests go. But in this instance, obviously, they have to finance other teams and their teams when they go away. So can you offer some more assurance to them how long the timescale for the end of lateral flow tests will be? Or could you consider a sports bubble for teams who come over who are probably in Guernsey for 6 hours or so, not really needing 5 lateral flow tests?
So from my perspective, obviously the charging is not within my gift one way or another. But I think, as always, we're looking to move forward, and removing the lateral flow post-arrival for CTA arrivals is definitely something that we want to look at. It's a case, as always, we've moved forward incrementally. It's served us really well to date. But I think that's something, if they're only here for 6 hours, that's something that possibly could be considered. But again, unfortunately, that's not something that I could personally implement.
No, well, I as a politician could answer that too. And just following on from Dr. Brink's point, sometimes a shortcut is the longest way round, and that we've taken a gradual approach. Your point's a very valid one. Politically, we took the decision to charge for lateral flow tests, £25 for the 5, etc., etc., etc. We explained how that was computed previously. We did consider whether or not if we were going to continue for the next few weeks, whether we should waive the cost of lateral flow tests, but we decided it's a significant sum, over £250,000 for the next 4 weeks or so, to the public purse, and we didn't feel we could justify that. I can't guarantee what the CCA are going to do, but we're going to look at it within the next 4 weeks, and it may well be, but it might not be also, it may well be that we'll be saying in 2 or 3 weeks, no more lateral flow tests, and that would then hopefully solve the problem of the football club, the rugby club and other sports bodies coming backwards and forwards to the island. But we're very sympathetic to their position, but just bear with us a bit longer, that's really what we're saying.
Do you feel confident that we're coming to the end of that?
Yes, I can't guarantee it because, I could be saying something to you today and something really terrible happens tomorrow, but yes, I'm confident.
But I think a significant step forward for the sports bubbles is that teams can, from the 4th of October, teams will be able to travel backwards and forwards freely, vaccinated or unvaccinated. So I think that will uncomplicate matters for many of the teams to a huge degree. And certainly the feedback, that's one of the concerns that they've expressed time and time again.
Gentleman from Ireland.
So on the note of travel, we've heard from those in the tourism industry saying that the Travel Tracker app isn't really fit for purpose, it's complicated, it needs to be simplified, and actually maybe taking a look at the Jersey version, which seems to be a lot more simple to use.
Right.
Are there any plans to simplify the Travel Tracker app or update it?
No, it is being looked at because, the criticism you've made is not the first time we've heard it. As a result of the announcements we've made today, it should be simpler anyway going forward. Less time, less categories, etc., etc. But that is under review. Juliet, and then...
Can I ask a supplementary question to that? Something that's always slightly confused me is why you can only fill it in 48 hours before you travel, because having used the Travel Tracker app both on my laptop and on my phone, it's very smooth to fill in on a laptop, which is great when I'm in Guernsey. When I'm travelling and coming back with my phone, it does not usually run as smoothly. So have we considered possibly doing a longer run-in time to be able to fit it in, so perhaps people can fit it in before they even go away using a laptop?
Well, I think, again, those kind of things we'll look at, because that's, again, a very valid point in connection with what you're saying. And it just shows that although technology is great, it's not infallible in respect. But, I mean, again, that's a valid point. Matthew.
Thank you. Just for clarification so I understand, so travelling from a red country requires a day 1 and day 9 test, whereas outside the CTA, while not vaccinated but not red, day 1 and day 8. I just wanted to know what the day difference is.
It relates to aligning with the UK for the external travel. If you look at the requirements for the UK, they say test on or before day 2, so that's why we've done a day of arrival and a day 8. So it's aligning that. But if someone has a negative test on a day 8, they'll then be able to be released on that.
Okay. I mean, I think it's like most things, if I can venture this opinion, things will, again, ameliorate and change over a period of time. This is another step. And as Dr. Brinker said, and as we've said, we're aligning with the UK, really, because it's easier for people, and we feel we're at that stage of development or control of the virus. So but things will be different in a month's time to what they are now, I venture to say.
Deputy Ferber's question for you. Following yesterday's judgment at the Magistrates' Court and, of course, the recent media coverage around the incident regarding the farmhouse hotel, do you feel confident that there are no leaks within the CCA moving forward?
Yes, and I think also that gives me the opportunity to say this in relation to it, because there's been a degree of criticism, a lot of criticism in relation to me over a period of time. Now, I held this position for about 11 months, I think, something of that order. In that particular time, I've been accused of bullying Dr. Brink so that she resigned and was going off to live in South Africa. I've been accused of intimidating other members of the CCA so that they could open up the borders earlier because I've got hospitality interests. I've been accused by 2 of the supporters of Deputy St Pierre, Mr McIntosh and Mr Santos, of lying on a broadcast in relation to Warren Gatland when he was over. That complaint was dismissed by the disciplinary code. And when I said that I might sue them, Deputy St Pierre's remedy, instead of saying they should apologise, was that it was improper of me. It was not sensible of me to sue them. I've been accused of being corrupt. I've been accused of falsifying the fact that I had to self-isolate for a week or so previously. I'm not asking Dr. Brink to confirm it, but I have received a call from Dr. Brink on a Sunday morning saying I had to self-isolate for a week or whatever the period then was. But again, that was a matter of convenience. A person's sexuality is a matter for themselves, but it's a fact I'm not gay, and yet there've been, and bear in mind I've got children, I've got grandchildren, there've been images of me, photo fits put on of me having a sexual act with Mr. Nussbaumer. All of those are completely despicable. I have done nothing wrong. I believe that although the court case, as you said yesterday, is concluded, at least as far as I'm aware, in connection with those people, there may be a continuing investigation. I'm not aware that it involves me, as I sit here today, but there may be another investigation going on in relation to something else. So I can't comment further until whether it's the border agency or the police or law enforcement say our investigations are at an end. I've been a lawyer a long time and it's improper. I would just say, in relation to all of that, I would hope that there is some common decency out of there, and I would hope some people, if we're making comments, crawl back under their stones. Next question, please. No more questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Brink. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.